I wasn't expecting a confession. I was just trying to get through a 5-hour train ride without my knees going numb or my phone dying. The guy sitting next to me, Brian, looked like the kind of person you forget the moment you stand up. Neutral hoodie, worn sneakers, messy brown hair that said he didn't own a mirror or didn't care. We'd exchanged the usual polite nod, that unspoken agreement strangers make to coexist without acknowledging each other too much. That lasted maybe 20 minutes. It started with his elbow brushing mine every time the train rocked. Then a quiet sorry that turned into a smile. Then a comment about how the Wi-Fi was garbage, which somehow turned into a conversation about work, then about travel, then about how we both ended up on this exact train, in these exact seats. By the time we hit the second stop, it already felt too easy. I'm Kevin. I told him that somewhere between talking about bad coffee and the woman across the aisle who wouldn't stop sighing dramatically. Brian, he said. And then, after a pause, like he was deciding whether to add something else, he smiled again. Nice to meet you. If I'm being honest, I noticed him more after that. The way his voice dropped when he laughed. The faint scar near his eyebrow. The fact that he really listened instead of waiting for his turn to talk. It wasn't flirting. Not obviously. Just comfortable. Familiar. In a way that didn't make sense for two guys who'd met less than an hour ago. Somewhere past the halfway point, the train grew quieter. People slept. Headphones went on. The world outside blurred into trees and gray sky. That's when Brian shifted in his seat. Can I ask you something kind of weird? He said, not looking at me. I shrugged. On a train? Weird as expected. He huffed out a quiet laugh, then went silent again. Too silent. The kind that presses against your ears. I almost didn't book this trip, he said finally. I changed my seat last minute. I glanced at him. Why? He swallowed. I saw his throat move. Because I wasn't sure I wanted to sit next to a stranger. That bad, huh? I tried to joke. No, he said quickly. Then softer. Because I was hoping I'd sit next to you. That got my attention. I turned fully toward him. We've never met. I know. His fingers twisted together in his lap. That's the problem. Or the point. I don't know. The train rattled on, oblivious. Brian, I said carefully, what are you talking about? He exhaled, long and shaky, like he'd been holding it in for years instead of minutes. I've seen you before, he said. A lot, actually. My stomach tightened. There are only so many directions a sentence like that can go. Okay, I said slowly. Where? Same route. Same train. Different days. He finally looked at me, and there was something raw in his eyes now, something unguarded. For over a year. I stared at him. You're serious? He nodded. I used to take the earlier train. You'd get on 2 stops after me. Always sat by the window. Always reading or pretending to read while actually people watching. I felt heat creep up my neck. That's disturbingly accurate. I never said anything, he rushed on. I swear. I wasn't following you or anything like that. It just happened. Same schedule. Same seat most days. You became this constant in my week. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was unsettled. Another part, one I didn't want to examine too closely, was curious. And today? I asked. He gave a small, nervous smile. Today I finally moved my seat. Silence stretched between us again, heavier this time. Why tell me now? I asked. Because I'm tired, he said. Tired of pretending some things don't matter. Tired of keeping my mouth shut just because it's safer. Safer. That word landed hard. I studied his face, searching for something: regret, expectation, embarrassment. What I found instead was relief. Like saying it out loud had taken a weight off his chest. I don't expect anything from you, he added quickly. I just needed you to know. Before this becomes another thing I never said. The train slowed as it approached the next station. My stop was still far away. His, I realized, probably was too. I leaned back in my seat, heart beating faster than it had any right to. You know, I said. Most people would have started with height. He laughed, real this time. I panicked. I smiled despite myself. And that's when I realized something unsettling and undeniable. I remembered him too. The moment the thought crossed my mind, I almost laughed it off. But the more I sat there, watching Brian's profile as he stared out the window, the more it settled in. I did remember him. Not clearly at first. Just fragments. A guy a few rows ahead sometimes. Broad shoulders. The way he'd always lean into the aisle when the train got crowded. Once, I remembered, he'd given up his seat to an older woman and stood the rest of the ride without making a big deal about it. I clocked that. I always clock things like that. There was a day, I said slowly, testing the memory as it came back, when the train broke down for almost an hour. Brian's head snapped toward me. Yeah. And everyone was pissed. Someone was yelling on the phone. Someone else slammed a door. You were smiling, he said quietly, like you found the whole thing funny. I let out a breath. Because I just quit my job. I remember thinking, what's another delay? He stared at me now, open-mouthed. You had a navy jacket on. I continued, surprising myself. And you kept checking your watch like you were late for something important. My dad's birthday dinner, he said. I missed it. The air between us shifted. The awkwardness didn't disappear, but it changed shape, less sharp, more intimate. Like we'd accidentally stepped into a room neither of us knew existed, and now the door had closed behind us. So, I said, forcing a lighter tone, we're both creeps. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I guess. Another stretch of silence passed, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It buzzed. I was suddenly very aware of how close our arms were, how his knee angled slightly toward mine. I need to be clear about something, I said. He stiffened immediately. Yeah, of course. I'm not freaked out, I told him. Surprised, yeah, but not freaked out. His shoulders dropped a fraction. But, I added, you said you've been quiet about something for years. This feels bigger than just recognizing each other on a train. He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened, like he was bracing himself. I've been lying, he said finally. Not to you. To everyone else. Including myself. That word again. Safer. I nodded for him to go on. I've dated women, he said. I've had long relationships. I did everything the way I was supposed to. He laughed, short and humorless. Hell, my last girlfriend thought I was going to propose. And? I asked. And the entire time, he said, voice low now, I was thinking about moments like this. Sitting next to a guy I didn't know, wondering what it would be like to just be honest. I felt my chest tighten. Not with pity, with recognition. I noticed you, he continued, eyes fixed on his hands. Not in a creepy way. In a why does this feel important way. You looked comfortable with yourself. Like you weren't performing. I snorted. You should see me at family dinners. He smiled at that, then sobered again. I never talked to you because if I did, he said, I'd have to admit what that meant. The train rocked gently, like it was breathing with us. And what does it mean? I asked. He looked up then, really looked at me. That I'm not straight. And I never was. The words hung there, fragile and solid at the same time. I didn't rush to respond. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to say it right. I came out when I was 22, I said. Thought it would make everything simpler. Did it? I smiled faintly. Different kind of complicated. He let out a shaky breath. I envy that you had the courage. It didn't feel like courage, I said. It felt like survival. That seemed to land. His eyes softened, something easing in his expression. So why now? I asked. Why me? He hesitated, then shrugged. Because you feel safe. And because if I got off this train without saying anything, I'd hate myself for another year. My stop was still far away, but suddenly time felt limited. Like this conversation existed in a bubble that would pop the moment one of us stood up. I glanced down, then back at him. Brian, I'm glad you told me. Really. His lips parted, like he hadn't expected that. But, I added gently, confessions have consequences. Even the quiet ones. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I just needed someone to see me. I held his gaze. I see you. The words felt heavier than I meant them to be. The train announced the next station over the intercom. Brian flinched. That's me, he said softly. Too soon. He stood, slinging his backpack over one shoulder, then hesitated. Can I dash? He stopped himself, shook his head. Never mind. Ask, I said. Would you want to grab a coffee sometime? He asked. Off the train. On purpose. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew that if I said yes, this wouldn't just be a coffee. It would be the start of something neither of us could pretend away anymore. I smiled. Yeah, I would. Relief flooded his face so fast it almost made me laugh. He scribbled his number on the back of a receipt and pressed it into my hand. Our fingers brushed, just barely, but it sent a jolt through me that lingered long after he stepped into the aisle. As the doors closed behind him, Brian turned back one last time. Kevin, he said. Yeah. Thank you for remembering me. The train pulled away, and I sat there staring at the number in my hand, heart racing. Because I knew this wasn't just a coincidence. And I knew, somehow, that this confession was only the beginning. I didn't text him right away. That wasn't a power move or some carefully calculated delay. It was fear, plain and simple. The kind that sneaks up on you when something feels a little too significant for a random Tuesday afternoon. I folded the receipt with his number and slid it into my wallet, telling myself I'd wait until I got home. Then until after dinner. Then until the next morning, when things would feel less charged. They didn't. That night, I kept replaying the conversation in my head. The way his voice had dropped when he said he wasn't straight. The relief on his face when I said I saw him. The way he'd looked back at me through the closing train doors, like he was afraid he'd imagined the whole thing. By midnight, I gave up pretending I was calm about any of it. Kevin. Hey, it's me. From the train. The reply came less than a minute later. Brian. I was hoping it was you. I smiled at my phone like an idiot. We kept it light at first. Jokes about bad public transit. Complaints about work. The kind of cautious back and forth you do when you're circling something important without touching it yet. But it didn't stay that way for long. Brian, can I ask you something kind of personal? I stared at the screen, then typed back. Kevin, you already set the bar pretty high today, but sure. There was a pause this time. Longer. Brian, were you ever scared you were wrong? About being gay, I mean. That one hit deeper than I expected. I rolled onto my back, staring at the ceiling. Kevin, terrified. For years. Still am sometimes. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Brian, I keep thinking I waited too long. Like I missed the window to do this right. I thought about him watching me across train aisles for a year. About how alone that must have felt. Kevin, there's no right timeline. There's just honesty and everything else. That earned me a heart emoji. Simple. Earnest. It made my chest ache in a good way. We ended up setting a time to meet for coffee that Saturday. Neutral territory. No pressure. His suggestion, though I could tell it was taking everything in him not to overthink it. The cafe was small and warm, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu that tried a little too hard. I got there first and immediately regretted that decision. Waiting is always worse than arriving late. When Brian walked in, I recognized him instantly and also didn't. No hoodie this time. Button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up. Hair actually styled, like he'd spent more than 10 seconds on it. He looked nervous, eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. His smile when he saw me was unguarded. Wide. Real. Hey, he said, stopping in front of the table like he wasn't sure if a hug was allowed. Hey, I said back. You look different. He laughed. I tried. I can tell. We ordered drinks, hands brushing again at the counter, that same quiet spark. When we sat down, the conversation picked up easily, like no time had passed at all. But there was an undercurrent now, something heavier beneath the jokes. I almost canceled, he admitted after a while, staring into his cup. Why? I asked. Because this makes it real, he said. And once it's real, I can't pretend anymore. I nodded. Yeah, that's usually how it works. He looked up at me then. You're very calm about this. I'm not, I said honestly. I'm just used to the fear. That seemed to comfort him. We talked for hours. About his ex. About my coming out. About the weird limbo he'd been living in knowing something was off, but not knowing how to name it without blowing up his life. At one point, he shook his head and smiled at me, soft and incredulous. It's strange, he said. I've never felt this relaxed talking to someone about any of this. I felt it too. That sense of familiarity that didn't come from history, but from recognition. When we finally stood to leave, neither of us reached for the door right away. We lingered on the sidewalk, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. So, he said, hands in his pockets, would it be okay if I saw you again? I raised an eyebrow. You mean a second date? He groaned quietly. I didn't mean to make it sound like Dash. I'm kidding, I said, smiling. Yes, I'd like that. His relief was almost comical. As we said goodbye, there was a moment, just a moment where it felt like we might lean in. But neither of us did. Not yet. He walked away, glancing back once, and I stood there longer than necessary, watching him disappear down the street. Because something had shifted. This wasn't just a confession anymore. It was momentum, and I had a feeling the next part wouldn't be nearly as safe. The second date didn't feel like a second date. It felt like the continuation of a conversation neither of us had been ready to end. We went for a walk this time. No sofa, no table between us, No cups to hide behind. Just a long path along the river, the kind where people jog past you with headphones in, completely unaware they're running through the middle of someone else's life changing. Brian showed up early again. I knew because I spotted him pacing near a bench, checking his phone, then pretending he hadn't been waiting when he saw me. "You're terrible at acting casual," I said. He winced. "I've been told." We started walking without really deciding which direction to go. The conversation came easily, but it was different now, less cautious, more honest. Like we'd both accepted that whatever this was, it wasn't fragile anymore. It was just real. At one point, he slowed down. "There's something I haven't told you," he said. I glanced at him. "You're really not easing into these, are you?" He smiled, then grew serious again. "I keep thinking about that year. About watching you. And I'm trying to figure out if that makes me pathetic." I stopped walking. "Why would it?" "Because I didn't do anything," he said. "I just observed. I built this version of you in my head without knowing you at all." I turned toward him fully. "Everyone does that. We just usually don't admit it." He studied my face like he was checking for judgment. "You're not bothered?" "I am," I said honestly. "But not in the way you think." "How then?" "I'm bothered by how lonely that must have been," I said. "Wanting something and telling yourself you weren't allowed to reach for it." His throat bobbed. He looked away toward the water. "I was good at rules," he said quietly. "Good son. Good boyfriend. Good straight guy." He scoffed. "No one ever told me I could just stop." "You can't," I said. "You already are." That's when he reached out hesitant, like he might pull back at any second and touch my arm. Just above the elbow. Nothing dramatic. But it felt like crossing a line we'd both been standing in front of for weeks. He didn't move his hand away. Neither did I. "Can I ask you something selfish?" he said. "Probably," I replied. "Are you okay taking this slow?" he asked. "I want this. I just don't want to mess it up by pretending I know how to do it." I smiled. "Brian, I don't know how to do it either. I just know how to be honest." That seemed to be the right answer. We sat on the bench eventually, shoulders touching, close enough that I could feel the warmth from his body. There were pauses in the conversation now, but they weren't awkward. They felt intentional, like we were both listening to what wasn't being said. When he finally leaned in, it wasn't sudden. It was gradual, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't. The kiss was soft, careful, almost tentative, the kind that asks a question instead of making a demand. When we pulled back, he laughed quietly, disbelief all over his face. "Wow," he said. "Yeah," I agreed. He rested his forehead briefly against mine, then pulled away, eyes bright and a little overwhelmed. "I should tell you," he said. "This is the first time I've ever done that. Like, really done it." Something protective stirred in me. "Then we're definitely going slow," I said. He smiled, relief washing over him again. That expression was becoming familiar. I liked being the reason for it. As the sun dipped lower, we walked back toward the street. When we said goodbye this time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a pause. That night, lying in bed, I realized something that made my chest tighten. Brian wasn't just discovering who he was. He was trusting me to witness it. And I wasn't sure either of us understood yet how much that was going to change things. Things changed after that kiss. Not in a dramatic, everything is different now way. It was subtler than that. But once you notice a shift, you can't unsee it. Brian started texting me every morning. Nothing heavy, just little check-ins. "Did you sleep?" Or "This song came on and made me think of you." I didn't ask why. I liked that he didn't over-explain everything anymore. We kept seeing each other walks, dinners, lazy evenings where we sat on opposite ends of my couch pretending we weren't aware of how close we were. The physical stuff stayed light. Touches that lingered a second longer than necessary. Knees brushing. His hand finding mine without either of us acknowledging it. I could tell he was constantly negotiating with himself. One night, after a couple beers, he finally admitted it. "I feel like I'm 14 again," he said, staring at the TV even though neither of us knew what was on. "Everything feels intense. And terrifying. And amazing." "That tracks," I said. "Puberty is a mess." He laughed, then grew quiet. "Do you ever worry I'm going to wake up and decide this was a mistake?" I turned toward him. "Do you worry about that?" He thought for a moment. "I worry about everything," he said. "But not that." That answer mattered more than he probably knew. A few days later, he asked if he could stay over. Not casually. Not like it was no big deal. He asked like it meant something. Because it did. We were lying in bed, fully clothed, facing each other like teenagers at a sleepover. The room was dark except for the glow of the city through the window. I could hear his breathing, slightly uneven. "Kevin," he whispered. "Yeah. I need to tell you something before this goes any further." I didn't interrupt. "I've never been with a guy," he said. "At all. Not even close. I keep thinking I should have figured this out earlier, but the truth is I'm scared I'll do something wrong." I reached out and brushed my thumb along his jaw. "There's no test. No scorecard." "I know," he said. "I just don't want to disappoint you." That got to me. "You won't," I said firmly. "And if you get scared, or need to stop, or change your mind, that's okay. I'm not going anywhere." He searched my face like he was committing it to memory. Then he nodded, once. When we finally kissed again, it was different this time. Deeper, less tentative. His hand slid to my chest like he was checking that I was real. I felt him relax incrementally, like each second of closeness rewired something in him. But halfway through, he pulled back. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. I need a minute." I smiled softly. "You don't have to apologize." He let out a shaky breath and rested his forehead against my shoulder. We stayed like that for a while, just breathing. Later, as he slept beside me, one arm thrown awkwardly across my chest, I stared at the ceiling, feeling something I hadn't expected. Not impatience, protectiveness. Because this wasn't just about attraction anymore. Brian was unraveling years of denial in real time, and somehow, I was standing in the middle of it with him. And I knew from experience that the hardest part wasn't realizing the truth. It was living with it once you couldn't unsee it. The real test was still coming. The test came sooner than I expected. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just a text from Brian on a Wednesday afternoon that said, "Can we talk tonight? In person." Those 4 words are never neutral. He came over after work, quieter than usual. Less nervous energy, more tension. He kicked off his shoes and stood in my living room like he didn't quite know where to put himself. "Do you want a drink?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't think that's a good idea." That told me everything I needed to know about how serious this was. We sat on the couch, a little farther apart than we'd been lately. He rubbed his hands together, a habit I'd noticed when he was overwhelmed. "My sister knows something's up," he said finally. I waited. "She asked me if I was seeing someone." I said yes. He swallowed. "She asked if it was a woman." And I asked gently. "I didn't answer," he said. I just stood there. I felt a familiar ache in my chest. I remembered that moment in my own life, the split second where honesty is right there, and so is the fear. She laughed, he went on. Not in a mean way. More like she already knew. She said, "Brian, whatever it is, you don't have to do it alone." He looked at me then, eyes shiny, and it scared the hell out of me. "Because it makes it real," I said. He nodded. "Because if I say it out loud, everything changes. My family, my friends, the version of me everyone thinks they know. And us," I added softly. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Especially us." I shifted closer, but didn't touch him yet. "Talk to me." "I'm afraid," he said. "Not of being with you. I'm afraid that I'll lean on you too hard. That you'll become my only safe place. And that isn't fair to you." That stopped me. It was the most self-aware thing he'd said since we met. "I don't want to hide," he continued. "But I don't know how to come out without blowing up my life all at once. And I don't want to ask you to stay in the shadows with me." I reached for his hand then. He squeezed it like he'd been waiting for permission. "Brian," I said, "I'm not interested in being anyone's secret. But I'm also not interested in pushing you faster than you're ready to go." He nodded, listening intently. "This isn't an all-or-nothing switch," I went on. "You don't owe anyone your truth on a deadline. Not your sister. Not your parents. Not even me." He frowned slightly. "But don't you deserve dash?" "I deserve honesty," I interrupted. "And I have that." That seemed to loosen something in him. "I don't need you to come out tomorrow," I said. "I need you to not disappear when it gets hard." He looked down at our joined hands. "I won't. Promise." He met my eyes. "I promise." We sat there for a long time after that, just holding hands. No kissing. No distractions. Just the weight of what we were choosing together. Later that night, as he was getting ready to leave, he stopped at the door. "There's one more thing," he said. "Okay. I told my sister I'm seeing a man," he said quietly. "I didn't say your name, but I said it." My heart skipped. "How did she take it?" He smiled, small but genuine. "She said she wants to meet you." I laughed, relief and nerves crashing into each other. "Of course she does." He stepped closer, cupping my face gently. The kiss he gave me then wasn't hesitant or exploratory. It was certain. As the door closed behind him, I leaned against it, breathing out slowly. Because for the first time, it felt like Brian wasn't just stepping toward me. He was stepping toward himself. And that made whatever came next feel worth the risk. Meeting his sister made it impossible to pretend this was temporary. Her name was Laura, and she hugged me the second Brian introduced us, like she'd already decided I was staying. She had the same eyes as him, sharp, observant, warm in the same way of cutting straight to the point. "So," she said over dinner, smiling between us, "how long have you two been pretending this isn't serious?" Brian nearly choked on his drink. I laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "To everyone but him," she said, nodding toward Brian. "He's always been slow to trust good things." Brian rolled his eyes. "You don't have to psychoanalyze me in front of him." "I absolutely do," she said. Then she looked at me again, softer. "Thank you for being patient with him." That word again. Patient. I hadn't thought of myself that way, but hearing it out loud made something click. After that night, Brian stopped compartmentalizing so much. He didn't introduce me as a friend anymore. He still hadn't told his parents, but he talked about them openly, about what scared him and what he hoped might surprise him. One evening, a couple weeks later, we were back on the train. Not sitting together this time. Standing near the doors, bodies close, hands brushing on purpose now. "Funny," he said quietly. "I spent a year convincing myself I shouldn't talk to you here. And now?" I asked. "And now it feels like home," he said, without hesitation. That word landed harder than any confession. When my stop came, I didn't just wave goodbye. I kissed him quick, soft, public, not hidden. He froze for half a second, then smiled so wide it almost hurt to look at. That night, he told his parents. It didn't go perfectly. There were questions, awkward pauses, a moment where his dad stared at the floor too long. But there was no shouting, no ultimatums. When he called me afterward, his voice was shaking but lighter. "I didn't lose them," he said. "I thought I would." "You didn't," I said. "You just let them see you." A month later, we took that same train together again. Same route, same rhythm. This time, we chose our seats side by side on purpose. Brian rested his head briefly against my shoulder, subtle enough that no one else would notice. I let him. "I can't believe I waited so long," he murmured. I looked out the window at the blur of passing scenery. "Maybe you didn't wait," I said. "Maybe you arrived." He smiled against my shoulder. And for the first time since that first confession, everything felt quiet in the best possible way. Like something that had been holding its breath for years had finally let go. The strange thing was, nothing about the ending felt loud. There was no big dramatic moment where everything clicked into place. No cinematic declaration. No sudden certainty that this was forever. What we had instead was quieter and somehow, that made it feel more real. One night, a few months after that first train ride, Brian and I were back at my place, cooking dinner badly and laughing about it. Music played from my phone, something low and familiar. He stood at the counter chopping vegetables way too carefully, like the carrot might fight back. "You know," he said casually, "I used to think coming out would feel like jumping off a cliff." I glanced at him. "And now?" He smiled to himself. "Now it feels more like stepping on a solid ground and realizing I'd been off balance my whole life." I watched him for a moment. Really watched him. He looked different than the man who'd sat next to me that first day, lighter, more settled. Still himself, just no longer folded inward. Later, we lay on the couch, his legs tangled with mine, the city glowing softly through the windows. He traced idle patterns on my arm, something he'd started doing without thinking. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "what would have happened if I never said anything?" I thought about it. About parallel versions of us, passing each other on platforms, never colliding. "Yeah," I said, "but I don't miss that version." He nodded. "Me neither." A week after that, he officially moved some of his stuff in. Nothing dramatic, just a toothbrush at first, then clothes, then the quiet understanding that he wasn't really going back to his place anymore. One morning, we rode the train together again. Rush hour. Crowded. Loud. We stood side by side, fingers linked loosely between us. No one stared. No one cared. The world kept moving, just like it always had. Brian leaned in close and murmured, "You know what still blows my mind?" "What?" "That I almost stayed quiet." I squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you didn't." He smiled, resting his forehead briefly against mine before the doors opened and people surged around us. As the train pulled forward, I caught our reflection in the window, two guys standing together. Unremarkable, unmistakably real. And I realized something then. This story didn't start with a confession. It started with a year of silence and the courage to finally break it. And every day after that, that was the part we were still writing.